In the quiet coastal town of Port Haven, Maine, the white picket fences and salty sea breeze painted a picture of idyllic small-town life. But behind the charming facade of one modest apartment on Seaview Lane, a tragedy was brewing that would leave the community reeling. On a foggy morning in April 2024, a single act of betrayal would unravel a seemingly perfect relationship, turning a decorated ex-soldier into a perpetrator of an unthinkable crime. Mark Callahan, 39, was a hometown hero in Port Haven. A former Marine who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, he was known for his bravery and discipline. After a roadside bomb left him with a leg injury and PTSD, Mark was honorably discharged and returned to his quiet hometown 5 years ago. "He was the kind of guy you'd trust with your life," said his childhood friend, Ethan Walsh. Mark had this calm intensity about him, like he could handle anything. Settling back into civilian life wasn't easy, but Mark found solace in his fiancée, Emily Harper, 34, a local nurse with a warm smile and a knack for making everyone feel at ease. Emily was the heart of the community. She worked long shifts at Port Haven General Hospital, always ready with a kind word or a cup of coffee for a struggling colleague. Emily was a ray of sunshine, her supervisor, Dr. Laura Bennett, recalled. Patients loved her because she listened, really listened. Mark and Emily met 3 years ago at a veterans fundraiser. Their connection was instant. Her compassion soothed his battle-scarred soul, and his quiet strength gave her a sense of security. They got engaged after just a year, planning a simple wedding for the following summer. Their apartment, a cozy second-floor unit overlooking the harbor, was filled with Emily's colorful quilts and Mark's neatly arranged military memorabilia. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Mark's transition to civilian life was harder than he let on. The injury that ended his career left him restless, and the nightmares from his time overseas kept him awake long into the night. He took a job as a security consultant, but it lacked the purpose he'd felt in the Marines. He'd sit on the balcony for hours, just staring at the water, said their neighbor, Sarah Klein. You could tell he was struggling to find his place. Emily, ever supportive, encouraged him to join a local veterans group, but Mark withdrew further, spending long hours tinkering in the apartment's small garage, where he restored old furniture. Enter Ryan Harper, Emily's 32-year-old cousin. Ryan had moved to Port Haven a year earlier after a messy breakup in Boston. A freelance photographer with a carefree spirit, he was the opposite of Mark, talkative, artistic, and always chasing the next adventure. Ryan and Emily had grown up like siblings, and when he needed a fresh start, she welcomed him into their lives. Ryan brought this energy to their place, said a mutual friend, Jenna Cole. He'd show up with his camera, telling stories about his travels. It seemed to lighten the mood. Ryan's frequent visits to the apartment became a regular occurrence, his beat-up Jeep often parked outside well into the evening. To the outside world, Mark tolerated Ryan's presence. They'd share beers and talk about sports or Ryan's latest photography project. But some neighbors noticed tension. I saw Mark watching Ryan and Emily from the balcony once, said Sarah Klein. He didn't say anything, but his face, it was like he was sizing them up. Unbeknownst to Mark, Ryan and Emily's closeness had crossed a dangerous line. What began as late-night conversations about their shared childhood had, over months, spiraled into a secret affair. Emily, feeling the strain of Mark's emotional distance, found comfort in Ryan's easygoing nature. Ryan, meanwhile, was drawn to Emily's warmth, a stark contrast to his own unsettled life. On April 12, 2024, the fragile balance in the apartment on Seaview Lane shattered. Mark's day started early, as always. He left at 6 a.m. for a physical therapy session at the VA clinic, a 30-minute drive away. His therapist, Dr. Alan Reed, noticed Mark seemed distracted. He was quieter than usual, kept checking his phone, Dr. Reed later testified. The session ended at 8 a.m., and Mark, with no other plans until a 3 p.m. meeting with a client, decided to grab breakfast at the Anchor Cafe. There, he lingered over coffee, scrolling through his phone. At 9:15 a.m., he got a call. His client had canceled due to illness. With hours to kill, Mark made a fateful decision. He drove home, unannounced. When Mark walked into the apartment at 9:45 a.m., the scene he encountered shattered his world. Emily and Ryan were together in the bedroom, caught in a moment of undeniable betrayal. The details of what followed remain contested, but police reports and witness statements paint a chilling picture. Overwhelmed by rage and heartbreak, Mark, a man trained to act decisively under pressure, retrieved his old service pistol from a locked safe in the closet. Within minutes, both Emily and Ryan were dead, each killed by a single gunshot. Neighbors reported hearing shouts, followed by 2 loud bangs. Sarah Klein, alerted by the noise, called 911 at 9:52 a.m. When police arrived, they found Mark sitting on the living room floor, the pistol beside him, staring blankly at the wall. "He didn't resist, didn't say a word," said Officer Daniel Torres, one of the first responders. It was like the life had drained out of him. The small town of Port Haven was left in shock. The man who'd once risked his life for his country was now in handcuffs, charged with 2 counts of murder. The apartment, once a haven of love and laughter, became a crime scene, its walls stained with the aftermath of a betrayal that no one saw coming. As the investigation unfolded, the community grappled with questions. How had a man so disciplined, so revered, snapped so violently? Was it the weight of his untreated trauma, the sting of betrayal, or something deeper that pushed him over the edge? The trial, set for later in 2024, would reveal more about the secrets hidden behind closed doors and the devastating consequences of a love turned lethal. Mark Callahan stood frozen in the doorway of the bedroom in his Port Haven apartment, the salty tang of the Maine coast lingering in the air. It was 9:47 a.m. on April 12, 2024, and the scene before him was a gut-wrenching betrayal. In the bed he shared with his fiancée, Emily Harper, she lay entangled with her cousin, Ryan Harper. The soft indie music Emily loved to play during quiet moments filled the room, a cruel mockery of the intimacy Mark thought they shared. The curtains were drawn, unusual for a weekday morning when Emily usually lets sunlight flood their cozy second-floor apartment. "Mark," Emily gasped, scrambling to pull the sheet over herself. Ryan, wide-eyed, froze, his hands raised as if to ward off the inevitable. The air was thick with panic, the kind Mark had felt in combat zones, but this was different. This was personal, visceral, a wound no battlefield had ever inflicted. "Explain," Mark said, his voice low, a dangerous calm honed by years of military training. His hazel eyes, usually warm, were now cold as steel, fixed on the 2 people he trusted most. Emily's face crumpled, tears welling up as she clutched the sheet. Ryan stammered, "Mark, it's not what you think." "Not what I think." Mark's voice cut through the room like a blade. "How long, Emily? How long have you been making a fool of me in my own home?" His hands clenched into fists, the scars from shrapnel on his knuckles whitening under the pressure. The apartment, once a sanctuary of love, felt like a trap closing around him. Emily's voice trembled. 6 months, she whispered, barely audible. It just happened, Mark. I didn't mean for it to." 6 months. Mark repeated, his mind racing through every late-night visit from Ryan, every time Emily had seemed distracted, every excuse about working late at the hospital. The pieces clicked together, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. 6 months of lies. In my bed. In my home. Ryan slid off the bed, pulling on a shirt, his movements jerky. "Mark, listen, we didn't want to hurt you. It just—" "Shut up," Mark snapped, his voice booming through the small apartment. "You, who I welcomed into my life, who I shared beers with, who I listened to when you whined about your failed relationships. And this is how you repay me." His chest heaved, the anger coursing through him like a wildfire. Emily, now in a hastily thrown-on robe, stepped toward him, her hands outstretched. "Mark, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Let's talk. We can figure this out." "Figure this out?" Mark's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You chose this, Emily. Every day for 6 months, you chose to betray me." He turned abruptly, storming out of the bedroom, his heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. Emily followed, her bare feet slapping against the wood, her voice desperate. "Mark, wait. Don't do this. We need to talk." But Mark wasn't leaving. He was headed to the small storage closet at the end of the hall, a space he'd turned into a makeshift armory for his old military gear. Behind a locked metal box, secured with a combination only he knew, was his Beretta M9, a relic from his Marine days. He hadn't touched it in years, but he'd kept it, legally registered, he'd told himself, for protection. Now, as his fingers punched in the code, the date of his and Emily's engagement, a bitter irony, his mind was a storm of rage and heartbreak. Upstairs, Ryan grabbed his phone, his hands shaking as he fumbled to dial 911. "Emily, we need to go," he urged, his voice tight with fear. "I've seen that look before. He's not okay." Emily, standing in the living room, shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "He's my fiancé, Ryan. This is my home. I can't just run." "You don't understand," Ryan insisted, pulling on his shoes. "That's not the Mark you know right now. His words were cut off as Mark reappeared, the Beretta in his right hand, its weight as familiar as it was menacing. Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Mark, no," she pleaded, her voice rising in panic. "Put that down. You don't need it. Please." Mark's gaze was distant, his jaw tight. Years of training had taught him to stay calm in chaos, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield in Afghanistan. This was his home, his life, crumbling before him. "You did this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Both of you." What happened next would be dissected in courtrooms, analyzed by psychologists, and whispered about in Port Haven for years. Neighbors heard shouts, then two sharp gunshots at 9:52 a.m. Sarah Klein, the neighbor across the hall, called 911 moments later, her voice trembling as she reported the sounds. When police arrived at 10:01 a.m., they found Mark sitting on the couch, the Beretta on the coffee table, his hands stained with blood. Emily and Ryan lay lifeless in the living room, each killed by a single precise shot, a testament to Mark's military precision. "He didn't resist," Officer Daniel Torres later testified. "He just sat there, staring at nothing, like he was already gone." The apartment, once filled with Emily's laughter and Mark's quiet strength, was now a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape. The town of Port Haven was left grappling with the unthinkable. Their war hero, their protector, had become a killer. The trial would later reveal the layers of Mark's unraveling, his untreated PTSD, the strain of civilian life, the crushing weight of betrayal. Some would argue he acted in a moment of uncontrollable rage, others that his actions were cold and calculated, the product of a soldier's training turned inward. But on that foggy April morning, as Mark was led away in handcuffs, the only certainty was that a love built on trust had ended in blood, leaving a community to pick up the pieces of a tragedy no one saw coming. Mark Callahan stood in the living room of his Port Haven apartment, the Beretta M9 steady in his hand, its barrel trained on Emily Harper, his fiancée of 2 years. The soft indie music from the bedroom had stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence broken only by Emily's ragged sobs and Ryan's shallow breathing. It was 9:50 a.m. on April 12, 2024, and the cozy apartment on Seaview Lane, once a haven of love, was now a stage for betrayal and impending tragedy. The harbor breeze drifted through an open window, carrying the faint sound of gulls, a cruel contrast to the chaos unfolding inside. "We're civilized people, Mark," Emily pleaded, her voice trembling as she clutched her robe, tears streaming down her face. "We can talk. Please, put the gun down. Talk." Mark's voice was eerily calm, a soldier's restraint masking the storm raging inside him. "What's there to talk about, Emily? How you destroyed our future. How you cheated on me with your own cousin. How many times you smiled at me while I was out there, working to build a life for us, thinking you loved me." "We didn't mean to hurt you," Emily sobbed, her hands shaking. "It just happened. I didn't plan it, Mark. Ryan and we just connected in a way I didn't expect." "Connected?" Mark spat the word, his grip tightening on the pistol. In my bed, in my apartment, while I was at therapy for the leg, I nearly lost serving my country. You connected while I was trying to piece myself back together for you. Ryan, standing near the couch, took a cautious step forward, his hands raised. "Mark, listen," he said, his voice low, as if speaking to a cornered animal. "This isn't the way. Put the gun down. We'll leave. You never have to see us again. Leave." Mark's eyes, cold and hollow, locked onto Ryan. "And what? Pretend this never happened? Pretend you didn't make a fool of me in my own home? I let you in, Ryan. I listened to your sob stories about your breakup, shared my beer, my life. And this is what you do." Emily's phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with her mother's name, Karen Harper. The sound cut through the tension, but no one moved to answer it. Later, investigators would find Karen's missed call, time-stamped at 9:51 a.m., her motherly instinct sensing something wrong. If Emily had answered, if someone had intervened, the tragedy might have been averted. But in that moment, the call went ignored, and the room remained a powder keg. "I gave you everything," Mark said, his gaze shifting back to Emily. "I left the Marines for a quiet life with you. I worked through the pain, the nightmares, to be the man you deserved. I was planning our wedding, Emily. Our life. And you threw it away for him." His voice cracked, the first sign of the pain beneath his rage. Emily's face crumpled, her voice desperate. "I love him, Mark. I know you can't understand, but it's true. I love Ryan. I still care about you, I do, but this, with him, it's different. It's love." The word was a detonator. Mark's hand steadied, the Beretta now aimed squarely at Emily's chest. "Don't you dare say that word. Love is loyalty. Love is sacrifice. Love isn't sneaking around with your cousin while I'm out there trying to rebuild my life." "Mark, please," Ryan interjected, stepping closer, his voice shaking but firm. "You're a soldier. You've saved lives. You're better than this. Don't throw it all away. Better than this?" Mark's laugh was bitter, hollow. "I was a soldier. I fought for something. Now I'm nothing. No career, no purpose, and now no fiancé. You took the last thing I had left." The apartment's landline phone rang, its shrill tone piercing the air. It was Emily's hospital supervisor, checking on her absence from a scheduled shift. The sudden sound startled Emily, who took a step back, tripping over the edge of the rug. To Mark, trained to react to sudden movements in high-stress situations, it was instinct. His finger tightened on the trigger, and the first shot rang out, deafening in the small space. Emily collapsed, a red stain blooming across her robe as she clutched her chest, her eyes wide with shock. "Mark, no!" she gasped, blood trickling from her lips. Ryan screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and rushed to her side, dropping to his knees. "Emily! Oh God, Emily, hold on!" His hands pressed against the wound, blood seeping through his fingers. He looked up at Mark, tears streaming down his face. "Call 911, Mark. For God's sake, she's dying. Do something." Mark stood motionless, the Beretta still in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. The soldier in him, the one who'd saved lives under fire, screamed to act, to call for help. But the betrayed man, the one whose world had just shattered, saw only the wreckage of his life. "You did this," he said, his voice flat, detached. "You both did." Ryan, still kneeling beside Emily, whose breathing was now shallow and ragged, looked up, his eyes pleading. "Mark, please. Call an ambulance. She can still make it. Don't let this be the end." But something in Mark had broken, a final thread snapping under the weight of betrayal. The line between discipline and chaos, between the protector he'd been and the destroyer he was becoming, had vanished. "You ruined everything," he said, raising the gun again. Ryan's eyes widened. realizing too late what was coming. "Mark, no!" he shouted, one hand still on Emily's wound, the other raised in a futile gesture. The second shot echoed through the apartment, silencing Ryan's plea. He slumped forward, a bullet through his chest, his body falling across Emily's. The landline stopped ringing, leaving only the sound of distant waves and the faint wail of sirens approaching, too late to stop the tragedy. Neighbors, alerted by the gunshots, had called 911 at 9:52 a.m. When police entered the apartment at 10:01 a.m., they found Mark sitting on the couch, the Beretta on the coffee table, his hands limp in his lap. Emily and Ryan lay dead on the floor, their blood pooling on the hardwood. "He didn't say a word," Officer Daniel Torres later recalled. "He just looked empty, like he'd lost everything." The trial would later dissect those fatal moments, with experts debating whether Mark's actions were a calculated act of vengeance or a spontaneous breakdown fueled by PTSD and betrayal. But for Port Haven, the scars of that day would linger, a reminder that even heroes can fall when trust is shattered. As Mark was led away in handcuffs, the apartment stood silent, its walls bearing witness to a love destroyed by lies and a soldier undone by his own pain. Mark Callahan stood in the living room of his Port Haven apartment, the Beretta M9 still pointed at Ryan Harper, who knelt beside the dying Emily, his hands slick with her blood. It was 9:53 a.m. on April 12, 2024, and the once warm space, filled with Emily's quilts and Mark's military medals, was now a scene of devastation. Emily's phone buzzed again on the coffee table, Karen Harper's name flashing on the screen. The sound was a stark reminder of the world outside, oblivious to the horror unfolding within. "Mark, what's happening?" Karen's voice crackled through the speaker as the call went to voicemail, her tone laced with worry. "Emily, call me back. I'm worried about you." Mark's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Ryan. He grabbed it, his movements sharp and deliberate, and smashed it against the floor, the screen shattering under his boot. The gesture was final, a severing of any connection to the outside world. "Mark, please," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible over Emily's shallow, gurgling breaths. "If you're going to kill me, at least call an ambulance for her. She doesn't have to die like this. Please, Mark, if you ever loved her, do this one thing." Mark's gaze dropped to Emily, lying on the hardwood floor, blood pooling beneath her, staining the rug they'd picked out together at a flea market last summer. For a fleeting moment, he saw her as she was, laughing on the balcony as they watched the sunset, her hand in his, planning a future that now lay in ruins. He remembered the ring he'd given her, the promise of a life together. But then the image of her with Ryan, in their bed, burned through his mind, reigniting the acid of betrayal. The soldier in him, the man who'd loved her, flickered and died. "No," Mark said, his voice cold and final. The first shot had been instinct, a reflex to Emily's stumble, but the second was deliberate. He aimed the Beretta at Ryan's chest, his Marine training guiding his hand with lethal precision. Ryan's eyes widened, a final plea frozen on his lips. The shot rang out, sharp and deafening, and Ryan collapsed beside Emily, his body slumping over hers, his hands still reaching for her as if to shield her even in death. The silence that followed was suffocating. The smell of gunpowder and blood hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint salt breeze from the open window. Outside, Port Haven carried on. Seagulls cried, a fishing boat's horn sounded in the distance, and a neighbor walked her dog along Seaview Lane. The apartment's thick walls muffled the shots, and no one outside suspected the horror within. Mark lowered the gun, his hand steady despite the chaos in his mind. He looked at his hands, hands that had carried wounded comrades to safety, hands that had held Emily through sleepless nights, hands that had rebuilt furniture to fill the void of his post-military life. Now, they were the hands of a killer. Emily's breathing stopped, a faint rattle marking her final moment. Mark heard it, the sound of the woman he'd loved slipping away, and felt nothing. The rage, the pain, the love, it had all burned out, leaving only an empty shell. He walked to the couch and sat down, placing the Beretta on the coffee table next to a half-read novel Emily had left there. The normalcy of the scene, the book, the coffee mug, The framed photo of him and Emily smiling at the beach was jarring against the two bodies on the floor. With a calmness that unnerved even him, Mark picked up his phone and dialed 911, the number etched into his memory from years of service. "Port Haven Police Department, what's your emergency?" A dispatcher answered, her voice professional but warm. Mark recognized her, Lisa Bennett, a friend from high school who'd once cheered at his football games. "Lisa, it's Mark Callahan," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "I'm at my apartment, 23 Seaview Lane. I just killed my fiancée, Emily Harper, and her cousin, Ryan Harper. 2 homicides. The gun's on the table. I'm unarmed now. Send a team." There was a stunned pause, the sound of Lisa's breathing catching. "Mark, are you serious? Is this real?" "It's real," he confirmed. "I'll wait here. I won't resist." And then, for the first time since he'd pulled the trigger, Mark's composure cracked. A single tear rolled down his cheek, unnoticed even by him. The call sent the Port Haven police station into chaos. Lisa transferred the call to Captain Tom Reynolds, Mark's former CO in the local veterans group, who took the phone with a sinking feeling. "Mark, it's Tom," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Tell me exactly what happened. Slow down, take it easy." Mark's response was mechanical. "I came home early from therapy. Found Emily and Ryan in my bed. They'd been having an affair for 6 months. I lost it, Tom. Took my Beretta and shot them. They're dead. I'm in the living room, waiting. Mark, are you hurt? Is anyone else there?" Tom asked, his mind racing. "Just me and the bodies," Mark replied. "The gun's on the table. I won't touch it. Send the team." "Stay on the line, Mark," Tom urged. "Don't hang up. We're coming now." "No," Mark said softly. "I need a minute." He ended the call. Tom dispatched every available unit, sirens piercing the quiet morning. The news spread like wildfire through the small station. Ethan Walsh, Mark's childhood friend and a fellow officer, was in the break room when he heard. "No way," he muttered, his coffee mug slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. "Not Mark. Not him." 7 minutes later, at 10 a.m., 3 police cars screeched to a halt outside 23 Seaview Lane. Neighbors gathered, drawn by the sirens, whispering in confusion. Sarah Klein, the across-the-hall neighbor, watched from her window, her heart pounding. "I thought it was a break-in or something," she later told reporters. "Then I saw Mark walk out, hands up, blood on his shirt. He looked gone." The response team, trained for high-risk situations, approached cautiously, aware that Mark was a former Marine with combat experience. Lieutenant Maria Cortez used a megaphone. "Mark Callahan, come out with your hands above your head, visible and slow." The apartment door opened, and Mark emerged, his movements precise, almost robotic. His jeans and flannel shirt were stained with blood, his face expressionless. "On your knees, hands behind your head, ankles crossed," Cortez ordered. Mark complied without a word, his training evident even in surrender. 2 officers approached, one of them Jake Turner, who'd trained with Mark at the local shooting range. Jake's hands shook as he cuffed him. "I'm sorry, man," he whispered. "Don't be," Mark said, his voice flat. "You're doing your job. I'd have done the same." Inside, the forensic team found a scene that matched Mark's confession. Emily Harper lay on the living room floor, a single gunshot wound to her chest, her robe soaked in blood. Ryan Harper was beside her, also shot in the chest, his body slumped protectively over hers. The medical examiner estimated Emily's death was quick, Ryan's instantaneous. The Beretta, still on the coffee table, had 2 spent casings nearby, each shot fired with military precision. The lead forensic tech, Amanda Lee, had to step outside to compose herself. "It was so normal," she later said. "A cozy apartment, photos on the walls, a life, except for the bodies. That's what got me. In the police car, Mark stared out the window, the harbor fading into the distance. Ethan Walsh sat beside him, his voice thick with emotion. Why, Mark? Why didn't you call me? We could have talked, figured something out. Mark turned to him, his eyes hollow. What would you have done, Ethan? Changed the fact that my fiancée was sleeping with her cousin? That my life was a lie? That everything I fought for was nothing? The trial would later unravel the layers of Mark's dissent, his untreated PTSD, the isolation of civilian life, the crushing betrayal. Some would call it a crime of passion, others a calculated act of vengeance. But as Mark was driven away, the town of Port Haven was left to grapple with the loss of 2 lives and the fall of a hero, forever marked by the tragedy that unfolded behind the walls of a quiet apartment. Mark Callahan sat in the back of the police car, his wrists cuffed, staring blankly at the harbor as it receded into the distance. The weight of his actions settled over him like a fog, numbing the pain that had driven him to pull the trigger. In the passenger seat, Ethan Walsh, his childhood friend and fellow officer, broke the silence. Why, Mark? He asked, his voice thick with grief. I would have helped you through this. I would have stopped you from throwing your life away. They betrayed you, yeah, but now you're a murderer. Is that how you want to be remembered? Mark's lips curled into a bitter smile, his eyes distant. I had nothing left, Ethan. My career ended with this damn leg. My future with Emily was a lie. What was I supposed to be remembered as? The broken soldier who got played? Or the man who made them pay? That's not justice, Ethan said, his voice firm but shaking. It's murder. You know that better than anyone. I know, Mark replied, his tone eerily calm. And I'll face the consequences. But they faced theirs too. At 23 Seaview Lane, the news spread through Port Haven like a tidal wave. Karen Harper, Emily's mother, arrived 20 minutes later, her SUV screeching to a halt outside the apartment. She fought past the police tape, screaming, My daughter! My nephew! Let me see them. Captain Tom Reynolds, who'd known Karen from community events, had to physically hold her back, his voice breaking as he delivered the unbearable news. Karen, I'm so sorry. Emily and Ryan are gone. Mark killed them. Karen's wail echoed down the street, a sound so raw it brought neighbors to tears, even those who barely knew the family. Port Haven, a town where violent crime was almost unheard of, was forever changed. This wasn't a drug deal gone wrong or a stranger's crime. This was personal, a betrayal within a family that shattered the community's sense of safety. By noon, Mark was booked at the Port Haven police station. He cooperated fully, giving a detailed statement without a lawyer present. I came home early, he said, his voice clinical, as if recounting a mission debrief. Found Emily and Ryan in bed. They'd been having an affair for 6 months. I got my Beretta from the closet and shot them both. Emily first, then Ryan. When asked if he regretted it, Mark paused, his jaw tightening. I regret it came to this. But I don't regret making them pay for what they did to me. That statement would haunt the trial. Mark Callahan's case began in October 2024 at the Cumberland County Courthouse, drawing national attention. A decorated Marine turned double murderer, driven by the discovery of his fiancée's affair with her cousin, was a story that gripped the media. Headlines debated betrayal, mental health, and the pressures of military life. Mark pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, but his lawyer, Sarah Feldman, argued for mitigating circumstances: PTSD, emotional devastation, and a moment of psychological collapse. The prosecution, led by Assistant DA Michael Torres, was unrelenting. This was no spur-of-the-moment act, Torres argued. Mark Callahan retrieved a locked weapon, aimed, and fired with military precision. He had every chance to walk away. He chose execution. The trial was agonizing. Karen Harper took the stand, her voice barely audible through sobs. He took my daughter, my nephew. They weren't perfect, they made mistakes, but they didn't deserve to die. No one deserves to die for love. Ethan Walsh, torn between loyalty to his friend and horror at the crime, testified, "Mark was a hero, a man who saved lives. But that day, he let rage destroy him. Now 2 people are dead, and he's lost everything." Defense psychologists diagnosed Mark with severe, untreated PTSD, exacerbated by his forced exit from the Marines and the betrayal he uncovered. They argued he'd suffered a dissociative episode, a break from reality triggered by emotional trauma. But Mark, given the chance to speak, dismantled their case. "I wasn't out of my mind," he told the courtroom, his voice steady. "I knew what I was doing. They humiliated me, lied to me, destroyed me. I made a choice to end it." The courtroom fell silent, his lawyer visibly deflating, the prosecutor nodding grimly. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Guilty on both counts of first-degree murder, no mitigating circumstances. On November 2, 2024, Mark was sentenced to life without parole. At 39, he faced the rest of his life behind bars. Karen Harper wept silently as the sentence was read, clutching a photo of Emily and Ryan as children. For her, no punishment could undo the loss of her family. The aftermath rippled through Port Haven. The apartment at 23, Seaview Lane sat empty, its lease terminated. No one wanted to live in what the local paper called the House of Heartbreak. It was eventually sold at a loss and converted into a short-term rental, though guests often reported an eerie feeling in the space. Karen Harper moved to a smaller home inland, unable to bear the sight of the harbor. She founded the Harper Healing Fund, supporting victims of domestic violence and mental health resources for veterans. "I can't bring Emily and Ryan back," she said in a 2025 interview, "but I can try to stop other families from breaking like mine did." Mark was sent to Maine State Prison, where he became a model inmate, quiet, compliant, isolated. He refused media requests and cut contact with friends, including Ethan, who visited once in 2025. "It was like talking to a shadow," Ethan said. "The Mark I knew was gone. There's just this hollow man left." The case remains a dark chapter in Port Haven's history, studied by criminologists as a stark example of how betrayal, untreated trauma, and a loss of identity can converge into violence. Veteran support groups use it to advocate for better mental health resources, while domestic violence experts highlight the warning signs missed in Mark's isolation. In Port Haven, the story is told in hushed tones, a cautionary tale of love turned lethal. Parents point to it when teaching their children about controlling anger. Couples seek counseling sooner, wary of hidden fractures. Mark Callahan, once a hero who risked his life for his country, became a cautionary tale, a man who crossed the line from protector to destroyer. 3 lives ended that April morning, 2 by bullets, 1 in spirit. And a small coastal town learned that even in the quietest places, the line between love and tragedy is razor thin.